uh, by lighting this flaming chalice or flickering candle. And I hope you can see this, and I'm going to shift it to the table here. And, all right, so the reading this morning is a short quote from Abraham Lincoln, which is, "Elections belong to the people. It's their decision. If they decide to turn their back on the fire and burn their behinds, then they will just have to sit on their blisters." The other comment, which I think is appropriate to what we're facing with the uncertainty of the upcoming elections, is a quote from Winston Churchill, which is, "Success is not final. Failure is not fatal. It is the courage to continue that counts." I think we need to keep that in mind no matter what happens. So with that, I'd like to introduce Frank Mullen, who graciously agreed to speak this morning on the challenges to election integrity in the upcoming midterms. He served as investigative reporter for the Reno Gazette-Journal for 25 years and currently edits the Reno News and Review. In his long career, he has covered innumerable elections, so I think he's well qualified to comment on this one and elections in general. While at the RGJ, he was nominated for a Pulitzer Prize. In 2021, just last year, he was awarded the Robert Laxalt Distinguished Writer Award, a joint award from Nevada Humanities and the Reynolds School of Journalism, of which he is an alumnus, I would add. He's also been inducted into the Nevada Writers Hall of Fame, and I can't resist the temptation to point out that our own Jim Hulse is a former journalist who is also in the Nevada Writers Hall of Fame. Mr. Mullen is the author of the Donner Party Chronicles. He is an historian of the American West, and indeed currently teaches Nevada history at TMCC. He also taught journalism for 15 years at UNR. He also travels the West giving Chautauqua performances of a wide variety of characters, and I will have to wait and see whether any of those characters turn up this morning. We'll see. So Frank, thank you very much for joining us. Welcome, and the floor or the screen is yours.
Oh, thank you. And I want to take the opportunity to wish everybody a happy Nevada Day and Halloween and El Dia de los Muertos as well. And as Kevin noted, I was involved in elections for a long time. And there are about 300 election deniers running for office in 18 states right now. That translates into about 60% of Americans seeing one or more big liars on their ballot on November 8th. And according to political experts, about a third of those election deniers probably will win, with the majority of those gaining seats in the House of Representatives. And some of them, led by our own Jim Marchant, by the way, some of the challengers to Secretary of State offices, will definitely win in some of those states. In red ones, certainly, but if they win in the swing states, they will be sitting right next to the levers of the ballots and be able, Marchant has already said this, to manipulate future elections to get the results they want, and to hell with the choices of the voters. As an American, I think that's horrific. We're on the edge of a constitutional crisis. As a journalist, I've been struggling since 2020 to find a way to report on the steady drumbeat about the lies surrounding the 2020 election and also local elections. I've been writing stories about political campaigns since 1976, the year I got my first paid byline. At the time, I was working as a restaurant cook in Denver. I'd wanted to be a writer literally since grammar school, but I didn't go to college after high school. Instead, I hitchhiked around the country and held various blue-collar jobs to get the experiences that I hoped would be fodder for the great American novel. And yes, it was the Jack Kerouac syndrome. But 5 years after high school, I had a lot of novel writing or novel-worthy experiences, but I hadn't written so much as a letter to Santa. I started writing freelance stories that I pitched to weekly newspapers, and after a couple of rejections, I sold one. The editor liked the story, but he said I must have been dead asleep on the day in J school where they explained newspaper style. He said my punctuation was bizarre, and I didn't know what to do with quotes, and I buried the lead. And I was thrilled that he said that, because I had not ever gotten within miles of a journalism school or college for that matter. But I thought it'd probably be a good idea now, since I didn't know what this guy was talking about in terms of newspaper style. So I enrolled in college and worked at restaurants at night and did freelance stories and college classes during the day. And I learned more than newspaper style. Basically, even more important than where to put the punctuation is your approach to doing stories. Although Fox News has made a mockery of the phrase, the primary rule is that stories need to be fair and balanced. In my very first journalism class, I was taught that writers should never take sides in a news story. You should never have to slant the facts. You never have to hang anybody in a news story. Professor Greg Pearson told us they always hang themselves. Ask questions, report the facts, and always give everyone their best defense in print, and do it high in the story. Don't judge, just report. Trust the readers to figure things out for themselves. I followed that advice for 4 decades and through scores of political cycles. When I began teaching part-time at the Reynolds School of Journalism at UNR, I passed on those rules of engagement to my own students. But I always emphasized that when they covered a story, they were reporters, not stenographers. They weren't there just to take notes. They were there to think. Don't take anybody's word for anything. If your mother says she loves you, check it out. Strive to report not just what people say is going on, but what's really going on. And when it comes to controversial and political topics, make it clear when arguments don't line up with reality, but when the writing happens, play the issue straight down the middle. That's what ethical reporters did for decades. And even in wildly polarized times like the Vietnam War era, that approach kind of worked. There are always fringe elements on each side of every issue, poisoning the well from both the left and the right, groups like SDS and the John Birchers, but they weren't given a lot of weight in coverage. Then came Donald Trump. The national media shoulders a lot of blame for the rise of Trump and Trumpism. His Apprentice TV show elevated him from a New York huckster and failed businessman into some sort of billionaire genius who existed only in the producer's imagination. National media relentlessly covered him, from his constant birtherism during the Obama administration to his racist takes on national stories to his presidential campaign. Reporters knew he was a fraud, but he was entertaining. He captured readers and viewers. He got a lot more coverage and a lot earlier than the other candidates. And in general, the coverage was more positive, or at least benign. The American media was following the rules too, and the Trump campaign used reporters to its advantage. At the same time, the rise of the World Wide Web and social media changed the political landscape. Isolated pockets of extremists could gain a national audience online, and social media amplified fringe views to the point where they seemed to be on an equal footing with uncontested facts. Media outlets spent 4 years debunking Trump's lies about everything from crowd controls, crowd sizes, to storm tracks, to quack COVID cures, but couldn't make much headway against the tsunami of disinformation washing over the nation on a daily basis. The big lie, the completely debunked accusation that the election was rigged and that Trump won, began more than a year before the election of 2020. Trump said many times that his loss would mean that the election had been rigged. The January 6th hearings put a spotlight on that traitorous process. The big lie had been debunked by more than 60 courts, recounts, audits, local and state investigations, yet it persists. Disturbingly, millions of people believe it. In Nevada, Adam Laxalt, who is now running for Senate against Catherine Cortez Masto, was the big salesman for the big lie in Nevada. Even before the votes were counted, he pranced in front of TV cameras, toting bankers' boxes that he claimed held evidence of tens of thousands of illegal votes. By the way, the numbers kept changing. It reminded me of the whole Joe McCarthy thing in the 50s, where there were 267 communists in the State Department. And then 10 minutes later, another reporter talks to him and there's 115 communists. And then he gets on TV 3 days later and there's 7 communists. And I mean, it just bounced around, and that's what was happening with that. And one of the claims that he made over and over, and others made over and over, was that 10,000 dead people voted in Washoe County. Zombies. I hate zombies. And so, in November 2020, I went on a hunt for the walking dead voters. I spent many hours going through voter rolls from before and after the election, cross-checking the names and addresses against other data banks, including local obituaries. I even called voters. And what I found was that in Washoe County, people who had died and should have been purged from the voter rolls, a lot of them got mail ballots, but those were returned to the registrar's office unopened and unmarked. And so, yeah, some dead people got ballots in the mail because they weren't purged from the rolls, but there was no record of any of these deceased folks voting in Washoe County. And by the way, in Clark County, the same accusation was made. I think they said 15,000 to 20,000 cadavers registering their vote in Clark County. And this one guy got on TV and said, hey, my wife died in 2016, and she got I was looking at the voter rolls of who voted and who didn't, and she's registered, or she is recorded as voting by mail in the election. So someone had stolen her ballot out of my mailbox, filled it out, and sent it in, probably for Biden. Yeah, that's how those people work. This guy was on TV, he held press conferences. Later on, it came out that he had filled out and mailed in the ballot himself. The only other example that they went public with in Clark County was a woman whose dad had died. She was not registered to vote. She had wished that she was. She didn't know there was same day voting, whatever. She got, this is her excuse. She got her father's ballot in the mail and said, oh, well, one person, one vote. You know, my dad's dead, but I can still vote. So she sent it in and she got caught. But that was pretty much it for the systemic rigged election in Nevada anyway. Yet it persists. By the way, none of the systematic fraud claims were verified in Nevada or anywhere else in this country. Yet the big lie has not only survived, it's become a steamroller. It spawned local big lies of rigged elections, including for the whole state of Nevada, Clark County and Washoe County. Right here in Washoe County, County Commissioner Janine Herman this year introduced an ordinance that would upend the election system in Washoe County. Basically, one of the things she wanted was hand counting of ballots, the ability of election monitors to stand very close to anyone in the election process and be able to halt the process if there were a complaint. And also, one of the proposals was to station National Guard troops at all the polling, armed National Guard troops at all the polling places. One of my Chautauqua characters is Huey Long, and when he wanted to intimidate opponents, he actually had the National Guard set up machine gun nests at polling places in New Orleans. And I was wondering what that would look like in Washoe County. Of course, it was defeated 4-1, the one being Ms. Herman. But the blatant and easily disproved lie that the county had, this was spread all over the place. Matter of fact, the perpetrator of this bought an ad in the Reno Gazette-Journal. They actually ran it. Then they apologized. But the claim is that Washoe County had 40,000 more votes than voters in the 2020 election. That has been debunked up and down. Mark Robeson of the Reno Gazette-Journal did an excellent job of doing a fact check on that and explaining how you might be able to think that happened, but these previous voter rolls they're basing this claim on were just snapshots in time. And his analogy was something like, you get a list of people at homecoming who claim they're going to graduate the following year, and you compare it to the graduation list the following year, and the two things don't match up. Anyway, it's not that simple, but it has been debunked by the registrar, the Secretary of State, and third-party people. But anyhow, people still believe it. In Nevada, several candidates in statewide and local races are devotees of the big lie. As a journalist reporting on that controversy by writing stories that are pitched right up the middle, it didn't seem like an option anymore for that topic. I formed Reno News and Review's current policy more than a year ago when Adam Laxalt began his campaign for the Senate. He focused on a negative campaign against Cortez Masto and never mentioned the big lie again once he declared. His base was already on board with the lie, and he didn't have to remind independents of that wacky fairy tale that didn't poll well. So every time I got a press release or a phone call from the Laxalt campaign, I told them, gee, that's nice. But what they wanted to talk about was really moot until Laxalt explained his devotion to the lie and explained his attempts to undermine democracy. I made the point that nothing else he said had any real importance until that matter was cleared up. After about 2 months, his campaign stopped sending press releases at all and broke my heart. And I treat other candidates who are election deniers the same way. They want to set an agenda that has nothing to do with, in some cases, their true nature and what they think about the election. They'd rather not revisit that, but that's an issue this year for every candidate. I explained the newspaper's policy in a 300-word editorial back in June. This is what I wrote. Journalists have always been loath to use the words lie or liar in a news story. And reporters are generally obligated to present both sides of political issues in their coverage of elections. Then came the big lie, the unfounded assertion that the 2020 presidential election was rigged and that Donald Trump won. The fairy tale has been unequivocally debunked in dozens of courts and found to be baseless by secretaries of state across the nation and by audits of the ballots, some run by partisans who were desperate to discover fraud. The big lie fueled the January 6th insurrection at the Capitol that resulted in multiple deaths. It remains a clear and present danger to our democratic process. But facts haven't swayed some political candidates who continue to wallow in the nonsense. In Nevada, some GOP candidates, including those running for the US Senate and the Secretary of State, are salesmen for the fantasy. In the Reno News and Review's campaign coverage, we'll be spotlighting those candidates' adherence to the falsehood. Journalists avoid the word lie because it is defined by the intent of the speaker. If someone claims the earth is flat, is he knowingly lying or just a simpleton? But intent doesn't matter when it comes to the big lie. It's immaterial whether those who spread it have swallowed the myth whole, or are pretending it's true in order to further their ambitions. The dangerous whopper is the most important thing about the campaigns of election deniers. In our coverage, the big lie is now their middle name. There is no other side. A lie is always a lie. In the current election cycle, the stink of the baseless lie envelops these candidates, and the shame will be attached to their names throughout history. In September, our publisher, Jimmy Bogle, wrote an editorial about, with the same theme, talking about how we treat op-eds, guest editorials that are submitted, letters to the editor, and online comments on our platform that espouse the big lie and other myths presented as facts. Jimmy noted that although the News and Review is often perceived as a liberal publication, quote, all political viewpoints and opinions are welcome, as long as they are based in facts. I repeat, he wrote, as long as they are based in facts. The problem is far too many politicians and their followers these days, most of whom belong to the Republican Party, are choosing to disregard or flat out deny proven facts. He cited several examples. Man-made climate change is real and it's kicking our butts right now, he wrote. COVID-19 vaccines, while not perfect, saved a whole lot of lives. There is no credible evidence that the 2020 election was anything but fair and legitimate. And he goes on to elaborate on those three items. And as an example, he gives he gives his example of some readers who wanted us to publish things that are verifiably, provably false, including one commenter who tried to claim the science behind climate change is faulty and that the powers that be are simply trying to, quote, use climate change as a way to lock us down and restrict us. Jimmy wrote, we don't want you here. Facts and dissenting opinions have always and will always be welcome in the Reno News and Review, but mistruths and lies have no place here, he wrote. And I've moderated a lot of those reviews, and you see the same things over and over. Someone just making a flat statement. There was no pandemic. It is just a creation of George Soros and the socialists who control everyone, you know, and or COVID vaccines have never worked. That's a scam too, etc. We don't print those. We don't put them on our website. We don't put them in the paper. It's kind of like the policy that Twitter finally landed on, although now that's gone, of course, with Elon Musk in charge. But you have to moderate these things. When we first at the Reno Gazette Journal, when we first got the ability to have readers comment on online stories, a lot of times, for example, in crime reporting, they would come up with a theory of the case that names suspects and motives that were, so-and-so, I know why that shooting happened. So-and-so was sleeping with so-and-so's spouse, and things like that. And I would read those in the comments and say, oh my God, this is clearly defamation. But at the time, the newspaper didn't care because there was a court decision that said platforms aren't responsible for what people put up on there. Since then, there's a bunch of moderation schemes going on, and I'm not sure how the Gazette journals work, but that would be whatever Gannett decides. That would be a corporate level decision, how to modify those and what types of comments might be judged inappropriate for the site. And so when Laxalt and Marchant and any other election denier is mentioned in our newspaper, we, meaning usually I write the stories, political stories, hammer away at their lies. Disinformation becomes their middle name. Their election denial is the most important thing about them and dwarfs everything else. Until they explain their devotion to the lie and their efforts to undermine democracy, nothing else they say carries any weight whatsoever. I keep coming back to the question of, wait a minute, why do you keep insisting that there was a rigged election? Why do you think Trump won? Why do those 60 court decisions mean nothing to you? And by the way, the answer I get back is usually those judges are cowards. They know it's right, but they're cowards because they know if they make the right decision, people will come to them. Well, who? Antifa. They're after them. George Soros, by the way, in the command center, apparently, according to these folks, giving orders to people at the county level and money, which he is. I mean, he's got a PAC, he's got a political action committee. Yeah, I'm always amused when I hear is the description of this person's powers. It's Marvel Comics needs to do a series on him. Earlier this month, I was a guest on Nevada Newsmaker, Sam Shad's show, and I was on a panel with Mark Robeson, who I mentioned is an RGJ reporter and has written a lot about politics and did a great job of explaining that whole 40,000 mystery votes thing. And we were talking about the way to handle election deniers, and he was saying, well, you're taking a pretty hard line. You're just shutting them down right off the bat. But that'll turn off readers who are maybe on the fence about it, or if you ever had a chance to change someone's mind, they wouldn't like the fact that you were immediately dismissing the lies about the election. And I don't know. I mean, what his alternative was is that you play it the old way. You do a he said, she said. They say the election is rigged. It wasn't. However, the registrar's office does a lousy job of cleaning up its voter lists, and a couple of dead voters, or not dead voters, but they found people who should have been purged from the list but weren't. Going off on the here's a little weight for that other side. And I disagree. I think that if you there's certainly room for, I mean, it's important to write a story about the registrar being unable to police the rolls properly and on any kind of a quick timetable. And I'm sure they would blame that on staff, and I think they'd be right. There's room, you need to do that story. It's a public service, but to insert it into a story about imaginary election fraud, it just gives the liars ammunition to say, oh, gee, look at that. We were right. They admitted it right here in the Gazette Journal or the Reno News and Review or whatever. And I've talked to a lot of the people who deny elections, both candidates and voters who say, I'm voting for whoever says, Biden lost. And one of the reasons I don't think Mark's suggestion of being rational and measured in your stories about this in terms of giving it any weight at all and trying to convince people that it is incorrect. When I talk to election deniers, whether they be voters or candidates, what I find is it goes beyond a rational process. It's a matter of faith. I was raised Catholic, and a pillar of that religion is transubstantiation, where during the course of the Mass, the priest consecrates bread and wine, and it is transformed into the body and blood of Christ. And even as a kid, I knew the communion wafer, I was an altar boy. I knew the communion wafer tastes the same before and after the consecration. I knew that if you ran up on the altar and grabbed, after concentration, and grabbed a sample of grabbed the wine cruet and the chalice full of hosts and ran to a chemistry lab, you would get the answer that the physical properties of those substances had not changed at all. But that's not the way it works. Nobody does that. It's a matter of faith. It's dogma. You have to believe. And that's how it is among the election deniers that I've interviewed. They reject all third-party debunking and the mountains of other evidence that the 2020 election was, in the words of the Election Commission and other watchdog groups and agencies, the most secure in American history. They cling to the notion that rigged elections happen because they believe it in their hearts. It's another example, which is reinforced by GOP leadership and partisan media outlets. And it's also related to the belief in other conspiracy theories. It's an attitude now widespread that people are entitled not only to their opinions, but to their own facts. Giving those folks the benefit of the doubt in my stories further enables them to do more damage, the way the national media paved the way for Trump and Trumpism. On this matter, continuing with the journalistic trope of on the one hand and then on the other hand type coverage is to accelerate the death of democracy. It's not just another trend in politics as usual. It is clear and present danger to the republic. On your ballots this year, the danger is many names. Adam Laxalt, of course, we talked about him. And I don't even believe he believes that I don't think he believes in the lie. Or I don't even know if he ever did. It's just a tool to him to help his ambition along. Jim Marchant, who I've mentioned, he's a candidate for Secretary of State. He says Nevada has not had a fair election or a legitimate election since 2006, except probably that assembly race he won in 2008. He's flat out said he's going to put his thumb on the scales to help any candidate he thinks should win. He worked with QAnon to field a Secretary of State election deniers in several other states around the country. Marchant is running neck and neck with against Cisco Aguilar in the polls for Secretary of State, and he may win. Some of his Secretary of State candidates that he promoted surely will win. Sigal Chada, she's an unhinged candidate for Attorney General. She's known for her, aside from election denial, her violent rhetoric and bizarre conspiracy theories. She's also in a too close to call race with incumbent Aaron Ford, Michelle Fiore of Las Vegas, another fringe candidate. And she's tied in polls with Zach Canine for Nevada treasurer. Locally, Janine Herman, who backed that election law earlier this year that failed, is up to keep her seat in the Washoe County Commission. Even some local school board candidates are backed by an election denier who has already spent in excess of $800,000 to support statewide and local candidates. That millionaire activist, there we go, has vowed to, this was the cover, October cover of the News and Review, has vowed to put little Trump 2.0s in office locally and statewide. And those are his words, not mine. He graciously agreed to an interview. And that's the fellow, by the way, that financed Joey Gilbert's recount and also his lawsuit, which the judge threw out. And just in the last 2 weeks, he was ordered to pay, Gilbert was ordered to pay the Lombardo campaign $163,000 in legal costs. But Trump will be gone someday, but Trumpism will remain. Voters must pay attention. Staying home to do laundry on election day or losing track of your mail-in ballot and not returning it is no longer an option. Democracy is on the ballot November 8th. Please vote. And encourage everyone you know to do so. If we get it wrong this month, we may never get another chance to defeat autocracy and proto-fascism. We may find ourselves living in a nation where lies are the norm and facts are just quaint artifacts of our political history. Thank you.
Thank you, Frank. After your description of the zombie election, I've decided what I want on my epitaph, namely mail-in ballot etched on my tombstone. So, Leah, do you have some questions from the chat box for Mr. Mullen?
No questions in the chat box, and I will put a couple of resources that I heard Mr. Mullen mention so that we can refer to those later. The interview with Sam Shad and a couple of those news articles related to Joey Gilbert and Robert Beadles. Yeah, go vote. I told all the moms in the park yesterday, go vote.
So questions here in the in-person audience? Diane.
I had a comment. Thank you very much for bringing out that experience of you in the Catholic Church, because it brings home the idea that, for heaven's sakes, there is no evidence of a God, but tell me how many people in the world believe that. And you also made a big distinction between belief and knowing. And I thank you for that. And by the way, I did read your article about Robert Beadles, and I don't remember your mentioning Peter Thiel, whose money is behind that guy.
Well, if you've got evidence of this, I'd love to see it, because I didn't put anything in there that I could not nail down completely.
Okay.
So that is why, I mean, a lot of stuff's floating around, but as a matter of fact, I didn't dwell too much on the whole anti-Semitic thing. I know the Nevada Independent did that in their story, but they didn't get an interview, and they went through 175 hours of video of him that's online, both for politics and also for cryptocurrency. And I went through several hours, not 175 though. And they got him on, so they isolated some quotes and put it on there. I mentioned his reference in his own book to Protocols of the Elders of Zion type stuff, but I didn't really dwell on that. And I think that story, by the way, about Beatles, this one, I stuck to the old rules on this one.
Yep.
Yeah, I appreciate that.
He had agreed to the interview, and basically the whole front part of the story is him telling his own story. I didn't have to hang anybody. And
Did it himself.
but he went through there, and I made sure I quoted him accurately, and this is his position. And then I put his critics in there and talked to political scientists about why is this happening? Why are people believing in things that are simply not true and proven not to be true? And that kind of, so got into that topic. And also how much money he put into the campaign. He's got to be over $1 million now, easy. I was going to bring down, we have a pile, no kidding, this thick. And you do too, except you probably throw them out as you get them, of those election mailers. They flood in every day, and I've been keeping track of them, and most of it, I mean, almost all of it is PAC money. Millions are being spent in Washoe County. Millions from political action committees, mostly GOP, but a couple Democratic ones in there. And yeah, there's George Soros is in there too, but he's not robotically controlling my brain or anything.
Yeah. Got it.
We have a question from the audience here, Jeff.
I was just wondering if those two cases, I assume both Clark County, of the people who voted for their relatives who were dead, did they get prosecuted in any way?
Yes, they did, but it was like a fine or something. I thought the guy that did it himself and then lied about it and tried to use that as proof of election fraud. I think he probably deserved a little stiffer sentence than. But I did read his sentence, but it wasn't my story, so I didn't really. But when he was sentenced, I saw that, and I think the woman kind of got it like a slap on the wrist, since she didn't do it maliciously. But by the way, the changes that they wanted to make or that Council or Commissioner Herman wanted to make in Washoe County.
No.
And every time I mention Nye County, horses come up on the screen. I don't know why. They tried this, and a few days ago, on Thursday, they shut it down. The Secretary of State shut it down. They were doing hand counting, and they were yelling out 5 votes for Joe Smith, here's a ballot number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, voting for, and they go through 5 people and double check it. They kept getting it wrong, and they only had 50 ballots to go through. It took hours to go through 25 ballots, and at the end they had 2 different counts, hand counting, and then they had to do it again, and then again, and this went on for 2 days for like 50 mail-in ballots. And the Secretary of State said it was absolute chaos. You people are crazy. This is good. And that's what they want to do for the whole state. If Marchand does, it's going to happen on the whole state. They got rid of their machines a couple of months ago. They voted that, and Marchand was down there. He was egging them on. And they went to this system from the 1860s, and now they're paying the price. So they don't know what they're going to do, because a judge has ruled their procedure unconstitutional. So they're kind of frozen down, can't count anything yet and don't know when they'll be able to. And but that's what they wanted for Washoe, and that's what Marchand wants for the whole state. So it's Boy, not normal.
Oh, my gosh.
Kevin, there is a question in the chat from Robin Palmer who wants to know, we know the problem. Are there fixes other than informed voters voting?
And I'm sorry, are there what now?
Are there other fixes to this problem other than informed voters voting?
Yes. Are there other fixes? Yes. And I think one of them is to make your voice heard. To give you an example, school board, during the pandemic, the height of the pandemic, they had a small group that was going down there, wanted to talk about critical race theory, which is not taught there, but they learned about it on Fox News or whatever. And they were complaining about an imaginary problem, but and I've talked to a lot of these people, and my take on it is that they're concerned about the way history is taught, and they want a sanitized white-centric version of history to be taught in schools. And that kind of thing. The voices you hear on that are these people, are these fringe people that want us to turn back, just like with elections, turn back the clock to the 19th century. They want to turn the schools back to the 19th century. And so I think getting involved, whether it's in your school board, in your local precinct, your local commission district, or whatever, because there's a vacuum there and it's being filled. And I don't mean run for office, although I'd love it to see sane people doing that. There's a vacuum there, and they're filling it with ideological people. And they're going to the planning commission level and school board level. There were like 3 candidates for each open school board seat, the challengers, and all of them were financed by or not all of them, I can't say that, but a lot of them were financed for or from people that were election deniers. Not that it matters on the school board level, but they were fielding candidates of like mind. And it used to have the luxury of not paying attention to elections or public process. We figured, what the hell? They're both sides are idiots, so that's a given, and they're going to screw something up no matter who's the mayor, who's the governor. So maybe I'll vote if I get the time. It's no big deal, because they were that close in terms of policy. That was a long time ago, but that kind of persists now. And now it's a lot more serious because the fringe is now the mainstream on the right, and it's not going anywhere. That's just going to continue, Trump or no Trump. And I think regular people need to, in some way, write a letter to the editor, go to a meeting, get in touch with your local candidates, help them out, whatever. But the reason we're going to get in trouble is not so much because the fringe is so brilliant, but because like the old saying, good people do nothing. And as long as that happens, this kind of thing will prosper.
Frank, Bob Quilich has a question for you.
I'd like to give you an opinion and let you respond to it, if you would. I think Biden and other Democrats missed a real opportunity to guide this discussion in a different direction, possibly more productive. I imagine what would have happened if Biden had said something like, insofar as Trump is in favor of free and open elections, we're in total agreement with him. We believe in free and open elections. And in that sense, we're on the same team. Now, elections, like anything else that people create, are always subject to improvement. There are no election systems that are perfect that we know of anywhere in the country. And so to that end, we're going to set up an election integrity commission somewhere in the capital perhaps, or someone throughout states. And we invite anyone who knows of election errors, mistakes, crimes, fraud. We invite them to present their evidence to the commission that we're going to set up, an impartial commission as far as we can do that. And we're going to look for ways to improve it. And if we find any fraud, we will certainly announce that. And so we invite President Trump and his followers, as well as Democrats, to present evidence of election problems. And we will report back to you on a monthly basis what we find. Frank, what do you think would have been the result of that sort of let's make things better approach?
I think that's probably akin to what I was talking about in treating the deniers by the old rules. I think it's to their advantage, because then they will say, wow, the federal government, even though you claim 60 courts and secretaries of state and all that, now the federal government is going to investigate with this commission because they know how dirty they are. And whatever comes out of that commission will be spun in the opposite direction. And so I think that's the logic. The commission thing is a logical thing to do. It's a rational thing to do. But I think it will be used by the deniers to reinforce the very thing that people are trying to debunk. I think and I know that when I ask a question, well, why do you think this or that? They're like, well, see the documentary 2000 Mules, which I have, and it's nonsense. There's video of a guy visiting computers in this polling place in this registrar's office, and he's walking around from computer to computer, and the narration is that this guy is one of Soros's robots, and he's running around he's stealing votes, from Trump and all that. He's an IT, it turns out he's an IT guy. His job is to walk around and make sure everybody's computer is working properly. and things like that. I mean, just bizarre that they did the cell phone thing and said, look at that. This guy, drove past the Dropbox, 7 times last week. And, and he drove by the, City Hall so many times. And he drove by the YMCA so many times. You're cherry picking things to, try to be proved. And that's what will come out of that commission. There'll be a report, and then there'll be a counter report with a bunch of nonsense about how the commission didn't do their job properly, and they lied in their report, and it just, snowballs. And that's why, for me, I'm at least on the pages of the News and Review, I'm content to say liar. Let's move on. Because the longer we extend this thing and give it any credence at all, it'll snowball, and it has been snowballing.
I agree that they certainly would attempt to do that. And I also agree that we would bend over backwards to find ways to control for that.
Oh, yeah.
They don't believe evidence. Evidence is null set.
Yeah, Frank, I appreciate your exploring the journalistic use of the word lie, or the big lie, because I've wondered about that since it has become common parlance in mainstream media, and I just wondered if that was a breach of journalistic procedure, but I think you've explained it.
Yeah, and it is a breach of procedure, and I think the point we're at now is a constitutional crisis, and If we blindly, march to procedure, we'll go right off the edge of the cliff. And to continue that analogy, it's a slippery slope too. Because once you've made that decision about one thing, what's to stop you from, making judgments and declaring things lies or truth flat out and taking sides on other political issues. But I think in the case of other political issues, whether it's abortion, the border, taxation, whatever, those things are not directly threatening the republic. Whereas the big lie is, the voter fraud thing is, and it's repeated and repeated and repeated. And people are the people that believe in it, you're not going to convince them otherwise. And then there are a lot of people, and those are people I'm talking to, who are like, well, if there's smoke, there's fire. And, worried about people who don't dig into it and yet have formed an opinion based on the blanketing of this lie. And so, I think it's, for me, changing 40 years of practice was not easy for this matter, but I think it's, the Alamo, we got to do it.
Yeah.
Very good. Well, Leah, do you see other questions in the chat box?
There are a few. I know we have 3 minutes left. So we have one from Nancy Ann on if the Nevada bar is considering disbarring Gilbert and Chadha. And then another one from Robin Palmer on, do you think there is danger in the fringe purposely doing things to raise concern about election integrity with voters in the upcoming election?
Versatile mommy.
On the first one, I don't know what the bar is going to do with that, and I really haven't been following it from the bar point of view. And the second one had to do with what someone.
Yeah, the second one was, do you think there is danger in the fringe, and that's in quotes, purposely doing things to raise concern about election integrity with voters in the upcoming elections?
Okay, I'm still not getting the chain of events there, but asking if the fringe is.
Purposely raising doubts.
Thanks, Bill.
If the fringe folks are purposely raising doubts in advance in order to cast doubt on their
Yes, absolutely. And as a matter of fact, just like Trump did, Laxalt said he's going to contest it if he loses. He said this more than a year ago. And a lot of those candidates are saying that. They're basically flat out saying, if I'm not the winner, just like Trump, if I'm not the winner, something is definitely wrong. There's been cheating if I'm not the winner. And so we've got to contest it. We got to sue. We got to get a recount. We got to get an audit, whatever, prior to a single vote being cast. And yeah, there's and it's national, it's not a few crazies here and there, but it's a national thing. And 300 election deniers, and half of them get elected, mostly in the House. That's dangerous. And by the way, the elections have been thrown to the House of Representatives twice in our history. So it's happened a long time ago, but it's happened.
And it makes you wonder if the courts are ready for this.
Yeah. Although the courts have performed admirably, even Trump appointees in this matter, and the Supreme Court itself refused to take on, those appeals. So far, on election denial, the courts have held, but in other issues, not so much.
The amount of litigation could be overwhelming.
Mhm.
Yeah. Well, Frank, thank you very much for
Thank you all.
I hesitate to say wonderful presentation, but an excellent presentation presented wonderfully. How's that?
I considered having at the end having someone in a zombie it being Halloween tomorrow, have someone in a zombie costume come up behind me, but
Yeah, I've seen an ad on TV like that. Maybe that should be adapted here, but and it leads me to say, I hope you're willing to come back. You understand, you've been talking to a bunch of Unitarian Universalists who pride themselves on having no dogma, but who do have one, and that is skepticism. And so it's glad to have you share your skepticism with us skeptics. And
okay, well,
thank you very, very
next
much.
time, maybe I can show up in person and get some of those donuts.
I would like that. I would like that. We won't save these for you. We'll get you some fresh ones. Okay. Again, thank you very much. Oh,
Thank you all.
Next week.
oh, yes, next week. I'm supposed to announce I have a presenter here who's reminding me to tell you about our next Sunday forum, which is the favorite poem project. And actually, Philip is here. Would you like to?
Yes, thank you, Kevin. I think I will. So we'll be here in person or on Zoom, and to really celebrate the importance of poetry in all of our lives. And I invite each one of you to share a poem. It will certainly help if you register with me in advance. And if you look in the e-news, you'll get my email address. And just let me know that you plan to share. And really, it is just 3 to 5 minutes of saying why that poem is important to you and reading it and sharing it with the group. So I hope we have a lot of people show up, and if you don't want to share, just join and enjoy what the importance of poetry to others. And I expect Kevin will choose one of historical relevance.
So each person would read their own poem.
Yep, and explain the relevance to them. Yep. So, and we'll look forward to seeing you next week.
I think we should give, yes, Mr. Mullen, another.
Good.
Okay.
All
So
right.
long.
Bye.
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 Bye, thank you.
Thank you.